For me, it is truly a great privilege and an honor to be able to share with all of you some significant aspects regarding the impact of the digital age on book publishing. In the next 30 minutes, we will attempt to reflect with the utmost deliberation and objectivity on some data and authoritative statements which can indicate to us what the future of books is expected to be like, both in digital and printed format. This presentation will be divided in two parts. In the first, we will see some significant statistical data concerning the publication of new books and the relationship between printed and digital format. We will examine some statistics from specific markets that are considered representative of current tendencies. In the second part, we will see the reason why printed books continue being relevant and have a promising future. As Seventh-day Adventists, we are not to forget at any moment the counsel given by the messenger of the Lord. If there is one work more important than another, it is that of getting our publications before the public, thus leading them to search the scriptures' missionary work introducing our publication into families, conversing and praying with and for them. It is a good work and one which will educate men and women to do pastoral labor. We should first take a look at the comparison on the digital versus the printed format. Let's start with a South American country, Argentina, which is the paradigmatic of the current tendency in these countries around it. The figures for this presentation has been taken from the official report of the Argentine National Chamber of Books. This slide shows us newly published digital books. The blue section of each bar shows the percentage of the total that was developed in digital format, while the orange section indicates the percentage of the same total that was turned into digital format but had originated in print. Evidently, the number of digital books that did not start out directly in that format is far greater, rather than tend to come from books that had initially been released in the traditional way, printed and bound. The next slide shows us in thousands the number of new publications, along with the format in which they were published from 2012 to 2019. The proportion is kept relatively constant. The production of printed works is quadruple that of digital production. This graph displays the undisputable reality that the publication of digital books in relationship to printed books continue to rise. In 2011, digital format represent 14% of all new publication, which by 2019 reached 21%. Let's continue with data from another market we consider to be significant, Mexico. This report bases its analysis on two variables that are considered fundamental when analyzing the circulation of a book. First, the type of agency in charge of publishing the work, and second, the channel or medium through which it proposes to distribute the book. In this pie graphic, we see the channel used most often for the distribution of books in Mexico continue to be both bookstores and direct sales, and that digital distribution represented 4% of the total sales in 2019, quantified by number of copies sold. There, we can see how the sales of digital books has been constantly increasing from 2014 to 2018, which is the time period we are analyzing. Keep in mind that $1 equals approximately 20 Mexican pesos. But no matter the currency in which we analyze them, these continue to be figures worthy of consideration. This graph was even more surprising to me, because while it is true that the sale of digital books is considerable, when we compare it to the sales of printed books, the pictures become clear. Looking at the results in dollars, of printed books came up to a total of almost $530 million, while sales of digital books reached almost $10 million, which represents 2% of the total sale values. Looking at the market in the United States, the country for statistics, the performance of the editorial production of books is as follows. Roughly 7 in 10 US adults, 72%, says they have read a book in the past 12 months in any format, a figure that has remained largely unchanged since 2012, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted January 8 to February 7, 2019. Print books remain the most popular format for reading, with 65% of adults saying they had read a print book in the year before the survey. This information comes from the prominent magazine Forbes. As we just read, 65% of Americans, which make up a market that is both sizable and very representative of our present and immediate future, declare that they prefer the printed format. In this statement, made on the CNBC News Network, they conclude that during the year 2020, the total value of book sales within the United States amount $22.6 billion in printed books and just over $2 billion in digital books. This means that 9% of sales come from digital books as compared to more than 90% coming from printed books. Also from CNBC News, but now with data from the United Kingdom, we find that 63% of the sales of physical books were made to people under 44 years of age, while 48% of ebooks were sold to the same age segment. This leads us to conclude that in the United Kingdom, the printed format continues to be preferred among those younger than 44. This graph, obtained from the world-famous survey maker Statista, reveals that the purchasing habits of readers of printed books in the United States from 2011 to 2019 have not varied much from one year to the next. This confirms once again that printed books continue to be predominant in the US market. I have found particularly interesting to analyze the age segment that use digital books the most, which is thus from 18 to 29 years of age, despite preferring the printed format. At the same time, they mostly use the digital format. Specifically referring to printed books, the number of copies sold in the United States soared in 2020, evidently motivated by the pandemic and the lockdown measures taken in many locations. This led to many more people compared to prior years buying printed books to read in their places of confinement. The total number of books sold in 2020 was enormous, almost 751 million. In other words, this was the highest number of books sold since 2008. I think it will be highly significant to present some of the figures I obtained. Comparing sales in different formats, printed books, ebooks, and audiobooks. With this data, we verified that the number of digital books sold last year in this great country, which is the standard and precursor of almost everything, is triple the number of audiobooks distributed. And that for every audiobook purchased, 7.5 printed books are sold. Additionally, we can determine that within the youngest age segment, that is ages 18 to 29, 74% read printed books, while 34% read digital books. We may wonder why this is the case, that in various countries, with different cultures and different continents, we find that the numbers are similar. In the time that follows, I will attempt to provide some reasons why statistics keep showing that printed books still have greater relevance, continue to sell a large numbers of copies, and generate a higher monetary revenue. Here we have some results of studies that have been carried out. I will begin presenting why the brain prefers paper. In an article published in the specialized magazine Scientific American Ferris Jarver, explained why the brain prefers paper. One of his major sources of information are the works of cognitive scientist Marianne Wolf of Tufts University. Wolf states that the brain in some way asks for physical part of reading, touching the paper, smelling it, seeing all the pages, seeing how the number of pages to be read goes decreasing, while the number of what has been read increase. Turning the page of a book is like leaving a footprint after another on a trail. The public prefers paper. As a Pew Research Center survey shows, 65% read on paper printed books. 37% read only on paper printed books. 7% read only in digital format. We must also acknowledge that digital books do offer some advantages. They can be exceptionally useful for reading about topics that don't require special concentration, and allowed for the immediate location of previous known reference, something that would require too much time in a paper book. This statement, taken from the New York Times, confirms our assertion, inviting us to read brief texts and headlines in electronic formats, but being very careful when choosing to read digitally anything that requires maximum concentration and text with deeper content. Likewise, this quote from Brain Facts encourages us to use the digital format for general information and news headlines, while it recommends that we use the printed format for reading longer and more substantive works. Scientists agree digital is fine to scan news headings for main ideas, but longer, complicated texts are best read in print, especially to retain the details. Unlike other cultural sectors, such as music or cinema, books have resisted digitalization. In spite of the advantages that ebooks bring, paper editions have survived and continue to be the preferred format for most readers. Another advantage of books printed on paper is allowing for a greater concentration on the part of the reader, since digital formats generally have more elements for distraction. Naomi Barron, a professor emerita of linguistics in the American University in Washington, D.C., did some research on the subject for 2 years. She collected data from 429 college students from the United States, Japan, Germany, India, and Scandinavian countries. When asked with which of the two formats they experienced better concentration, 92% of the students answered printed text. For children, who by nature are more likely to get distracted, the advice from Professor Barron, as quoted in the New York Times, is similar. Print, she said, makes it easier for parents and children to interact with language, questions and answers, what it called dialogical reading. Further, many apps and ebooks have too many distractions. We also find significant the comment by Dr. Jenny Radesky, a developmental behavioral pediatrician. When kids enter digital spaces, they have access to an infinite number of platforms and websites, in addition to those ebook you are supposed to be reading. This part of the population must be treated with the greatest care and effort, since it represents the future of our society and of the church. A study by the University of North Dakota defines that behavior of students and their ability to learn with this worrisome conclusion. Unfortunately, mounting evidence indicate that performance drops when students learn on a screen. Lauren Singer, a doctoral candidate at the University of Maryland, says that reading on a computer screen requires different set of skills than reading on text on paper. Working with the UM professor Patricia Alexander, Singer found that readers don't comprehend long text as well when it is read digitally. Once again, it highlights the fact that comprehension and retention are greater when using the paper format, and adds that on-screen reading requires additional skills. Because of all that, a few years ago, with the appearance of the ebook, those of us who were more traditional readers and who value reading a book with its physical contact, we put our hands to our heads. Many theories were proposed, and almost all of them assured us, or worse, ominously predicted, the disappearance of physical books in a progressive and resounding manner. Luckily, that did not happen, and there are no clear signs that this will happen in the future. Much has been said about the cognitive damage and the physical fatigue caused in humans by screen. And we can understand it better through this statement from an academic magazine. In general, screens are also more cognitively and physically taxing than paper. Scrolling demands constant conscious effort. And LCD screens on tablets and laptops can strain the eyes and cause headaches by shining lights directly on people's face. In the future, the different book formats will be a reality, as they already are here and now. Fortunately, those formats don't compete with each other. On the contrary, they complement each other. The market is so wide and diverse that it has space for all formats, since each one meets a specific consumer need. The emergence of photography, even colored and digital photography, has not made all painting disappear, whether portrait or landscape, not to mention abstract art. On the contrary, more paintings are being sold, and they are a safe investment as their value increases. What has happened in that studio arts, just like graphic arts, have evolved and adapted, finding a new, different place. The radio did not make the written press disappear, nor the television replace the radio, and neither of them has been forced out by internet or by YouTube. Each medium has simply specialized and found its niche. Books which may be touched, held, and felt, which we can smell and perfume, and which take up their spot within the physical space, don't seem like to disappear, because the sense of touch and smell intensifies the sense of sight. That's because one way to give testimony of our faith in a simple, direct, effective, and lasting way is to distribute physical literature, like the physical leaves of autumn, as Ellen G. White taught us in the most beautiful and expressive metaphor. Thank you very much for your kind attention.